Namaste and welcome. I'm Julie Hill. I help people eliminate pain and get back into doing the activities that they love. And today I wanted to share with you some things for you to be curious about in your own body with how you move your hips and how you hold them throughout the day. It'll make a big difference with how it moves up and down the chain of the rest of your being and the relationship between the muscles that are working for you. So, a couple of ways to look at the hips, right? We can look at a posterior and anterior tilt to the pelvis. So, posterior, letting the pelvis tilt backwards, right? Or anterior, letting it tilt forward. Let's look at that from the perspective of everyday life. If I were to be seated on a chair and I sit down with a posterior tilt and then do my work on my computer or read a book for a while or watch TV over time, that's going to change how I'm positioning my spine. It's going to cause some of those muscles to do double time in my back rather than having me be in a neutral position where I can better support front to back of my body. The same is true for an anterior tilt. So let's look at it from the perspective of standing. If I were to come into a yoga pose per se, warrior one, and I bring in from neutral an anterior tilt, right? And then I bring my arms up. Now I'm working into quite a bit of compression through the discs of my spine. I can feel them pushing down and together because of this anterior tilt of my hips. And if my leg's a little tight, its back thigh is going to ask me to do that. So I have to consciously bring it back to neutral. A little more stretch here, but a lot more ease through the spine, right? I'm well supported between front and back. We can look at that same thing from a side to side movement in the frontal plane. So in frontal plane, we typically talk about the leg adducting or moving towards midline. I can have that same thing happen here and adduct in this right hip just the same by bringing the hip over, right? The leg shifted closer to my midline. When I look at that from a standing perspective, if I'm standing in line at the grocery store or I have to wait for a while and I let that hip kind of shift over, if that's my pattern, I'm coming into that same adduction of this right hip. Sure, no problem for a moment or two, but if I'm standing for long periods of time, or my pattern is to constantly do that, I'm really wearing on these muscles differently. Some are working a lot harder and some aren't working hardly at all. And so that's going to start to impact how I am when I'm walking or transferring just onto one leg. If I look at it from a yoga pose perspective, I might do something like let this hip come into adduction and then lift the leg, right? I'm starting to impact my balance here rather than being completely connected through that leg and lifting it up. And so there's a room to kind of start this curiosity, to grow your awareness for how are you kind of in each plane of movement, right? How are we side to side and how are we holding our pelvis from posterior to anterior in the sagittal plane, right? And so just kind of notice. You might even find that there's a little bit of a twist wanting to happen when you go side to side rather than truly staying in that frontal plane. Your tendency is to come over and then start to rotate a little bit. Even if it's slight, it just tells you what the relationships are between the muscles, and that can translate over time into patterns that bring in strain and tension. If you're curious about your movement and you want to talk more, please reach out to me, yogabodylllc.com, or you can reach me at julie@yogabodylllc.com. Here's to a happier and healthier you. Namaste.